Welcome to the AI innovation space. We are your experts, and I'm Iyanu.
And I'm Todd.
We're here to offer our unique insights and hold conversations with top leading innovators in the world of AI and machine learning.
We dissect and discuss the often complex realm of AI in an accessible way and go deep in discussing the innovative technologies that impact our lives every day.
This podcast is sponsored by Lumen, an IT contractor offering a creative and human-centric approach to medical imaging, cybersecurity solutions, training and support, and more. Illumin's values of ingenuity and connection make us a leader in adopting innovative technologies for federal healthcare and beyond.
Visit Illumin's website at www.illumin.com for an overview of the services offered and to read our blog series on leveraging AI for your business. Thank you so much for listening, and let's begin.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to another edition of AI Innovation Space. I have my co-host Todd with me. Todd, how are you doing today?
Very well, thank you, Yana.
Good. Really excited to get into the conversation today because we have with us today the Director of Machine Learning at RingCentral. Sushant Hiray is the Director at Machine Learning Central, also was the co-founder and CTO of DeepAffects. Sushant, how are you doing today?
Great. Thanks for having me, guys. Super excited to talk with you today.
Awesome. So Todd, will you take it off or kick it off?
Sure. So, Sushant, we're very interested to kind of hear more about how you got involved in AI and kind of go over some of your background that kind of led you to your current role with RingCentral.
Sure. So, back in school, I was working on machine learning, but that was pretty much, classical machine learning, not the deep learning that we see today. But I was always excited about it. And then from there, once I graduated, I sort of joined AI startup called Lumiera. We were into healthcare, predictive analytics for healthcare. That's where I helped build the entire AI platform, all the way from the ETL pipelines to actually building AI tools, which will help predict, what is your risk of getting diabetes or some other comorbidities based on your previous patient history. And so that's where I started dabbling into tech, but also, playing around with huge amounts of data. Once I also met my other co-founder there, with whom I started my startup called DeepAffects, where we focused more on speech AI. We were sort of looking at various different problems in the AI space, and we sort of zeroed in on speech being kind of very tricky to work with because you have phone, you have video, you have a bunch of codecs. And so in general, NLP, there are a lot of companies who are doing text or even vision, but not a lot of companies out there apart from big tech that was, trying to democratize speech AI in that sense. And so we started working on it. We figured out a couple of problems that are typically not available as a solution to, indie developers who are creating their own AI-enabled applications. And so that's where we started. We worked on a problem called speaker diarization, which is essentially tries to tell you who spoke when. And we were sort of the first company actually to sell speaker diarization as a service. And it was super important back in like 2017, 2018, when people at that time, remote work wasn't super popular, but people were sort of getting into, using video conferencing, using phones, that sort of thing. And so we started working with various video conferencing providers and helping them sort of integrate some of our AI solutions into the pipeline. That's where sort of RingCentral came into place. While we were working on a lot of speech AI, we realized that we'd solved a multitude of problems. We solved the problem of who spoke when, what did they speak, and then using all of this like a rich data source of a conversation, we started building various analytics on top of it. We started building summarization on top of it. And so around 2019, 2020 timeframe, that's where we sort of created the first like conversational summarization API. And eventually we started, RingCentral ended up acquiring us, and the entire company along with the tech. And so since then, I've been here at RingCentral for a couple of years and leading the AI efforts here, building up the teams, and sort of really rethinking how communications work in today's space, but from an AI focus. So yeah, so we're sort of enabling every conversation that you're doing, whether it be phone, whether it be a video call, whether you dial into a contact center. We are trying to add various AI insights into each of these conversations.
Awesome. What are some of the comorbidities that you worked with at the inception? I think you mentioned your work in diabetes. And so I'm interested to learn a little bit about that specific work.
Yeah, so that is a pretty interesting problem and really difficult to solve. So we were basically looking at a patient's entire history, and then we were sort of figuring out, what is your risk of getting diabetes, or what is your risk of getting any mental health issues based on your lifestyle. So we had access to, we tied up with a few university hospitals, we tied up with few insurance agencies, and then they sort of gave us the entire history of a given person, and then we sort of started analyzing based on various different blogs, males who are middle-aged, who smoke, who live in this particular county, and what has historically been the case of their lifestyle, their previous medications, what is it that what is the risk for diabetes, what is the risk of some other sort of ailments, and we're sort of building various models on top of it. And so that was sort of my first exposure to not only working on large machine learning problems, but also focusing on giving sort of for the end users, in our case, which was basically healthcare providers, sort of helping them understand why we are predicting this, not just giving a black box prediction, because that was explainability was essentially the most important aspect of any healthcare algorithm. Like, they don't care what your algorithm thought and came out with a solution. They kind of want to know, how did you come up with this? And they kind of want some of these steps. So that was a time when we dabbled a lot. We sort of created a huge medical graph, which just consisted of all the possible medications that are out there, all the possible procedures that are out there, how each of these link to each other, and then how these affect people in their journey, in their lifestyle journey or in their healthcare journey. And so using this graph, we are sort of help also create some level of explainability back to the end user. Yeah. So that was pretty interesting gig.
That's really, really awesome. What models did you guys use for that specific project? Because it appears like you guys were working with a lot of historic, data sets. I'm not sure if you guys ventured into images. I would assume not. But how did you handle the machine learning aspect of that?
So we actually worked around that time. It was fairly early, but we worked a lot on graph neural networks because we are creating this massive graph. And then you had this patient history, which spanned based on your age. It could be 5 decades, or based on if you're a teenager, just 2 decades. But then there were a lot of this was very rich, but very sparse data. So we spent a lot of time trying to create, these embeddings, which are really good at condensing this data, but also understanding this timeline aspect of it. Like, if you have a medication every week, that is slightly different than a medication maybe every day or twice a day. And the frequency matters a lot. The number of occurrences matter a lot. And so, for example, if you have some sort of heart attack, and then when was the next heart attack you got? Like, a lot of these things, the timeline is kind of the most important bit at that point. Events in general are needed. And so we built a lot of custom ways of representing this data. A lot of my work, initial work, was in sort of taking this healthcare formats. Like, there are healthcare standard data formats, FHIR, HL7 formats, which you can use to pull this data. But this data format is designed for exchanging between agencies, like exchanging between insurance providers, exchanging between different healthcare providers. But it's not really designed to build analytics on top of it. All of these data formats are good for just exchange. So we sort of figured out a lot of like there were different novelties that we built in terms of how do you sort of represent this data itself, and then how do you store it so that you can build algorithms on top of it later. Because a lot of our analytics was twofold. One was like at an individual level, you want to give some predictions, but at a population level. So for an insurance, you have some level of population. They are more interested in population analysis, not necessarily every individual per se. They're kind of interested in is, hey, in this sort of, let's say, county, what is my current distribution for people who have diabetes or are pre-diabetic. And so we basically did a lot of population level analysis, and then there was like, but for an individual, you could sort of use a lot of historical population data and fuse it with their own data to understand what could be the predictions for them. So yeah, there was a combination there.
It's awesome. Todd, sorry.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that, Sushant. One thing you mentioned with DeepAffects is speaker identification and some analytics. Can you give some like applications as to like where someone would be interested in using that kind of technology?
Yeah. So nowadays you see a lot of these, bots which join your meetings, which help you take notes for you, which sort of do a bunch of these things, right? We sort of created a lot of these boilerplate APIs for a developer so that they could, figure out who's speaking when, which is kind of in a conversation, in a multi-party conversation, that kind of becomes one of the most important aspects is, how do you figure out in this conversation, when was Sushant talking? When was somebody else talking, right? So how do you sort of do that? So that's like the first aspect of it. Once you have this annotated along with the transcript, which is basically what they're speaking, using this, now you have a really rich data source. You have a rich data of speaker annotated transcripts. From there on, you can do a lot of these things. Now you can build, what we did was we built a lot of insights on top of it. So you could build very simple things like, Sushant speaks a lot versus, he's not speaking at all, or Sushant interrupts other people or does not. So you can sort of build out a lot of these metrics, which is sort of very straightforward to do based on our APIs. But then you could sort of take it to the next level. You can sort of now start summarizing this conversation. And then now your summaries could read like Sushant described his work experience at DeepAffects. And asked further questions, or asked specifics about healthcare and AI. So you get a lot of these specific data once you know who's speaking. So which then ties back to things like action items. So you kind of understand, this was the action item which was told by Sushant, but was assigned to Todd. So you need a lot of this like metadata to generate a lot of these like high level insights on top of it. And then this is just the start. And I'm sure you guys have seen OpenAI, you've seen ChatGPT. You throw in this data and it can extract so much of this. It can tell you what were the decisions, what were the top topics discussed. You can build a lot of these analytics on top of it by using some of our APIs. So that's basically what our customers were effectively building. They're building various vertical specific solutions. Now, we were sort of a platform, but then there were startups who were using our APIs to create specific healthcare tools based on things. So there is a lot of doctor-patient conversations that happen. Now you want to analyze that, create notes for the doctors automatically. There is like call center conversations, which is bulk of what data that we processed. You want to understand why a customer is calling a contact center. You sort of created the transcripts, but now you summarize them to sort of understand the general trend of, why are people typically calling me? What are they typically complaining about? So you can sort of generate a lot of these insights out of it. So in general, historically, people are, because of compliance or other regulatory issues, companies do store a lot of these recordings. They have to store it. So what we're trying to do is you unlock this data from not just being something that you stored for compliance, but actually use this data to create a lot of insights on top of it.
I see. Thank you. So were you guys also looking at like text to speech, or were you just focusing on the speech aspect?
So we did not really do text to speech around that time. We did dabble a little bit about it, but we did not really do text to speech. I do that a lot these days, but
Hmm.
we did that in DeepAffects. We focused primarily from taking the speech modality or video for that matter, and then generating insights out of it. So, for instance, you have like a video, this meeting where somebody's presenting slide decks.
Right.
So now you can sort of create sections in the video saying, the time A to time B, we were talking about introduction, time C to time D, we're talking about this particular project. So that sort of gives you a very natural way of just skipping through different things, figuring out what you want to look at. So those are the type of problems that I'm working on nowadays is now that you have started generating so much interesting data, now how do you sort of compress all of this data? How do you sort of now you ask a question to this gold mine of data and say, hey, which podcast did we discuss about healthcare and AI? And then it'll sort of pull up the relevant podcast, it'll pull up the relevant section in the podcast where you're talking about healthcare and AI. And so you
Hmm.
probably have seen some people who are trying to build some of these things. There are some startups coming up who are trying to sort of do a lot of these things. But what we're sort of doing that at a corporate scale for large enterprises where they have this bulk of data. They have millions of calls coming in into their call centers every day, millions of voicemails their agents are leaving for other people. So how do you now sort of start mining this data and getting top level insights and then also looking at an individual level?
I see. So you mentioned, healthcare and AI with this work. So can you expand on like RingCentral's, or do they have customers that are involved with like that kind of work, like medical doctors or call centers at clinics, or are you guys in have customers in that?
Oh, RingCentral has a wide variety of customers. We have
Mm-hmm.
huge banks, we have insurances, we have healthcare. So we are pretty much in every vertical that exists out there, right? We have a couple of $1 billion of revenue. So RingCentral as a company has a lot of customers. And so we are sort of building out what we are giving out is just customers a way to tap into this data and say, oh, you know what? This is what people are talking on the floor. This is what people are calling you for. And
Right.
then you can sort of generate some insights. So there are a lot of interesting things, right? Customers call to complain you. Uh, and then that kind of ties back into, hey, which part of our product is maybe not working well or why people are complaining, right? Can fix it. And then there is a second aspect is your salespeople call interested customers, right? And then you're kind of trying to understand, looking at this data. Oh, what are the next few things that we can potentially build that people are constantly asking us about? So you get a lot of this objective data just by analyzing this at scale, and so we're sort of building frameworks to help companies do that. So we just launched a new product called RingSense, which is sort of one step closer to sort of helping give this back to the end user.
Yeah, and RingSense uses generative AI, to my understanding, which is kind of all the rage these days. Can you kind of expand a bit more on how
Yep.
you guys are using
So
generative AI?
yeah, I mean, we've been using generative AI since before it became cool.
I
So, we've
gotcha.
been
Okay.
summarizing and so we have our own, we have a lot of proprietary data that we have access to, and we've created a lot of, language models on top of it. And the good thing about the latest generative AI craze is it has helped a lot of organizations become aware of how they could potentially use AI or how, it's not like historically when people said, AI chatbots are here, you no longer need humans, that sort of thing. That was pretty much a false alarm. Like the chatbots never worked, and nobody's happy talking to a chatbot. But now things are coming to a point where we really understand what a user is asking. When somebody submits a query, you're sort of much better at translating that query to an actual sort of response from an agent, from a bot in this scenario or something else. So we've been using different flavors of generative AI for various stacks inside of RingCentral. Like we've had a lot of work on different levels of summarizations, for instance. Like based on your persona, right? You might be interested in different things in a meeting. If you're an executive, you don't really care about like final details. You maybe just care about what were the decisions made, or what are the roadblocks, that sort of thing. if you're an engineer, you're kind of looking at some different aspects of it. So we created various flavors of summaries. We've created a lot of this different insights based on looking at your data and sort of using that to give you next level of response. Where we are now using generative AI is kind of this whole gold mine of data. Now you can, historically, we were building dashboards for people, but now you can write a query. You can basically ask, hey, how many times I'm offering discounts to people. You don't need to go and do a search discount word, because not every time you're going to say, I'm offering you a discount. You could say that in a multiple different ways. But now algorithms are becoming smart enough to understand what is it that you're looking for, translate that into an actual sort of query to the database, and then give you the responses back. So we are sort of helping you go from that level to a point where you can now, all the data that is available is at your fingertips. Where we are focusing on is, of course, on the enterprise side of things, right? Even though you have access to all of this data, you need to have strict access controls. Depending on you should, like, the problem with current large language models is there is no concept of access control. It knows everything, and if you ask it, you can get it to respond to anything at all, right? Now, which is great, but does not really work in case of like classified maybe meetings or classified documents. There is a lot of these things, right? What we are building is we're building up this whole stack from the ground up, where now you understand how do you sort of create access level policies that have been historically designed, but how do you fuse them with what newer AI technology is coming in, so people can so enterprise is not really worried about this thing. Oh, you know what, because of this anybody can access anything. Oh, that's a problem. So we are sort of building it from that aspect, is how do you make sure people only have access to what they really need to, and but given with this limited access control, they can still do a lot of things. Like, you already had access to your recordings, but now you can find things like, oh, which was this particular meeting that we discussed something. I'm trying to remember what that exact thing was. You don't really know what were the exact words that you spoke, but you can still find it, and you can sort of query this data that you have access. So there is some of those like aspects of the AI problem or where we're focusing on.
That is awesome. I want to really deep dive, go a little deep dive, do a little deep dive into, this voice intelligence platform we've been discussing about. Have you ever thought of, and sometimes I like to just think out of the box. Have you ever thought of what it would look like if you had, an avatar that basically responds, or is that something that you guys have in the works, where you actually can hold like conversations like we're holding right now, in a very intelligent manner?
You bring a very interesting point. That is something that we constantly discuss, right? I have so many meetings. I've double booked so many times. I'm like, you know what? I don't really want to join this meeting. I might just send in somebody. There is an avatar. He just joins my meeting.
Yeah.
And just responds, because now it knows all of my data, so it kind of knows how I speak. It can sort of respond like me.
Exactly.
And if it's not able to figure out what it should say, it can just pull me in, right? Oh, you're needed here, and then send a dispatch, bring me in. So that's where we want to be. I hopefully want to be there, so I don't have to attend more meetings. But yes, it's an interesting problem.
Yeah. It's awesome. So the other question we had, was, can you discuss, specific, unique or hard problems in making video conferencing tools smarter?
Yeah, I mean, hard problem. There is like a ton. I have a boatload of hard problems that we work with, but in general, the reason why this is a very super interesting space is because everybody is now using some sort of video conferencing platform. You're no longer even dialing people from your normal phone. You call them using WhatsApp, you call them on Messenger, you use FaceTime. You're not even using your cellular anymore. You're not using a direct line. All of the calls are going through the internet. And so the amount of data that is flowing through the systems is crazy. Historically, all of these systems have been designed to do one good thing, which is just take media, transfer it from point A to point B. That's it. Now, what we are doing is we are adding so many levels of AI on top of it. You have virtual backgrounds setting on the video side. You have like automatically reduce noise. There is like all of this tooling that we're adding, which improves experiences significantly, but they also cost a lot. And at the point where compute is there is a lot of compute required, which is okay. We can spend on the compute, but the interesting problem is latency. We want to just because we are adding AI experience, it does not mean that we can, build get away from the latency problem. So that's kind of like in terms of there is a whole lot of problems that we work with on the streaming side of things. How do you sort of transcribe media streams? One of the interesting aspects of what we're working on, and we filed a couple of patents around this angle, is you have meetings with people from multiple countries. Like I have teams in 3 different countries, and so which means that a lot of times people don't necessarily know the same language they're talking with each other, right? And you guys probably have seen this demo from Microsoft a few years ago where you could talk in one language and another person could talk in another language. That was pretty much a demo, right? It wasn't a working tool that was present there. But now what we have is you can automatically detect what language a person is speaking. You can automatically transcribe it. You can have your preferences to automatically translate it. And then to a point where we get towards the point where you can automatically also change and speak as, the TTS aspect of what we talked about. So there is a bunch of other things there. But so this is one of the interesting problems that we're trying to solve is we have solved the first basic problem of collaboration, which is we all 3 of us are in different places, but now we can talk. Great. Now, how do we sort of enhance this collaboration? How do we make it as seamless as possible to the point where it does not really feel like we're in 3 different places, but all of us are in the same room, right? How do we sort of break those barriers? And we're building on a lot of different tools to add different AI aspects to keep letting to sort of break these barriers in productivity, right? So there is like a lot of things that we do during the meeting, but then there is a whole bunch of AI insights that we generate after a meeting is over. And so this is where we do a lot of generative AI, but we also do a lot of like traditionally, you have like speech to text, you have a bunch of other things. And we're now doing summarization. We're generating all of this data, which again also needs to be stored somewhere, which also needs to be indexed to a point where you can now query this data. And every day there is something new coming up in generative AI space. Better embeddings are coming in. There is so many different ways of retrieval that are happening. Is how do you sort of figure out when you search on a query? There are so many ways to retrieve, and which is the best way. And that goalpost keeps shifting every single day nowadays, which is great for us as AI community, but a nightmare for me because today's state of the art is already stale when we have the same conversation tomorrow. And so for us, it is sort of like a constant battle in terms of, hey, we basically cannot try and do everything, right? So we have to pick and choose our horses, so to speak. Like we bet on some technologies. We build some abstractions at top of those technologies so that even if the underlying things change, you can still, you'll still be able to build enough abstractions out. So even if underlying API changes or something, you are still okay. Your end user does not need to understand all of those intricacies. And so those are like a lot of different problems that we work on the AI front, but on the constant shifting of goalposts, right? New embeddings are coming in. Today, Dolly 2 came up. Dolly 1 was like, I don't know, a couple of weeks ago. So it's like every day something new is coming in. We cannot try everything. But of course, we are at the top of like we're constantly monitoring what's great, what is something that will actually add value to us. And we sort of build the whole ML pipeline to a point where like, how can we accelerate experimentation between the team, but how can we also deploy these at scale so that we can immediately unlock value to our customers. So there's a lot of like the stuff that we work on that front. For
Wow.
us, so MLOps is a constant challenge, because there are very few companies who actually have so many models in production and are being used at a scale, right? When you're a startup, it's kind of becomes, you don't have a lot of traffic. So you have one or two GPUs that pretty much takes care of your entire traffic. So it's very easy to manage. At our scale, we are processing few million just voicemails every day. Forget about actual meetings. I'm just processing few million voicemails every day. So that kind of gives you an idea of the scale at which we're working, the concurrency that we need to handle. And so a lot of engineering optimizations that we kind of need to do to take care of that.
That's really cool. And speaking about, developing applications or AI ML applications at scale is something that I've been really, really very interested in. I believe Todd is also as equally interested in it because this is something that we've had to, discuss internally. What are some of your thoughts or thought processes around, how to actually build an AI ML application that has the ability to scale?
Yeah, and so
Like that.
I think nowadays, like I probably would do some things different than what I did like 3-4 years ago when I started my own company, right? So I'm an engineer at heart, so I try to more or less overcomplicate things to a point where we used Kubernetes very early on, and which was great in hindsight for now because now all of our systems are scalable very easily. But when I was a startup, that probably might not have been the best decision because that adds a lot more overhead in terms of how do you scale or how do you, because you're not really scaling that much. You probably just have those few GPUs reserved, and that's good enough for the traffic. You don't need those additional bells and whistles. So depending on where a company is at, right, you kind of need to pick and choose your tools, but your design should be in a way that you can progressively move away from the said tools if needed. Like, so for instance, you might not really need a large setup which involves Kubernetes and complicated MLOps pipelines because in your early stages, you're experimenting a lot. You're still trying to figure out what is the exact problem that you're solving. So you should be focusing a lot more on which models we are trying out, or maybe which prompts you're trying out nowadays, or depending on how hardcore you are, which models you're training, and what is the responses you're giving out to customers. And then slowly, as traffic matures, you get a much more clear picture of what is the product market fit for you. Yeah, in this sort of context of the conversation, it's more of a product AI fit. Which AI model or which prompts or which sort of which company you're using to sort of build out some of these. That'll help you get some traffic in. Because for me, what I'm personally interested in and what I also think is your strategy cannot be just a really good prompt, right? If it's just a really good prompt on top of OpenAI or any other LLM company, it's anybody can disrupt you in 2 days. There needs to be a lot more than just that. It could be now product innovation, it could be experience innovation, it could be just that using that prompt now you're able to generate data which you are able to feed in to get unlock newer experiences. So based on that, you will be able to create a much better moat in terms of at least get to a point where you can scale up to larger systems. And then I feel like from there onwards, there is a lot of decisions that you can take in terms of how do you build out the ML processing pipeline. It kind of varies depending on what modality of the data are you working on. Is it vision? Is it NLP? Is it like speech? So for instance, if it's like speech, then you need really complicated media processing pipelines. If it is NLP, then you probably not. You just need a text preprocessor, which will sort of just take your text input, clean it up, make sure all is well, and send the response back. If it's like PDFs or things like that. So there is the ETL part, I believe, remains very important. The only thing that kind of changes is how complicated your ETL is based on what your modality is. And then if your ETL pipeline is really well thought out or well designed, you can also scale up your AI systems very easily. You can add more GPUs and horizontally scale every AI sort of subsystem within that without really worrying about the rest of the pieces of the puzzle. So, AI are like AI is a tool. It's kind of means, right? It's not the end. You need to have something before that, something after that, and use the AI as a way. A lot of people, which is today, they basically think that using generative AI will help them solve a lot of problems. No, it's not. It's going to maybe help you get there closer. It's not solving all of the problems completely for you. So there is a lot of things that you need to do before it, a lot of things, do after it to get to the final finish line.
That's great. Thank you, Sushant, for sharing. So one thing I'm interested to hear a little bit about is you're the director of machine learning. Kind of what does that kind of role look like? You kind of talked about all the meetings that you get sucked into before. And how does being the director kind of feed into the organizational culture you're trying to build at RingCentral?
Yeah, so it's been a very interesting experience for me personally. So I've always worked in startups, right? I've worked with pretty much like pizza teams where I know exactly what everybody's working on. And now I manage a huge org where the people are located in different countries, they're in different time zones. Some of them don't even speak English. So it's an interesting mix of how do you sort of how do you sort of break down problems? How do you do that? But a large part of my job is now focusing on how do you get senior executives, how do you get our CEOs to understand, where AI landscape is going. How do we build our products? How do we change our products to a point where we can add a lot of AI innovations into it and, take some decisions so that we can be sort of like a leader in the space, right? So a lot of my work sort of involves in those aspects is it's more about like strategic planning. It's more about trying to figure out, which problems we want to bet on. And then there is another aspect is because there are so many AI, for instance, generative AI providers nowadays. Now you kind of want to figure out which ones you want to bet on. You want to figure out what is it that you do in-house versus what is it that you just use a third party for. So those are some of the decision-making processes that I am responsible for. And then finally, of course, I am responsible for delivering all the AI initiatives that we have. So we have a lot of models which are running into production, and the number keeps growing as we continue to add more language support, as we continue adding more different insight categories to our product suite. So how do you keep on managing this suite of machine learning tools? So how do you monitor these? How do you figure out, is there sort of drift or is there any quality degradation that is happening in the models over time? So those are like a broad level of things that I focus on. So yeah, that's the reason I have too many meetings. And so that's my ideal goal. I need to stop meetings. I need to figure out a way to create a avatar part that joins as Sushant in the meeting and does all this work.
Yeah, thank you.
Let's go. The other question that I had, which was an extension of the one that Todd just asked, is, how, do you navigate, your teams? How do you structure your teams to make sure that you are able to meet, the demand at scale?
Right. So we spend a lot of time figuring out this. How do you split teams, right? How do you keep them small enough without a point where there are too many teams and it's just a chaos, right? So the way we have done is we have like split teams into core AI, which actually work on building models, but there are a lot of supporting teams. There is like an ops team which is responsible for delivering all of these things to production, but then we've created a specialized ML ops team which understands the nuances of machine learning and how GPUs work, for instance, how to deliver ML products to production. And so we sort of spend some time training few folks, getting that team up. So there is like a SRE aspect of it. In terms of engineering, we've split the engineering itself into like a core backend, which is actually interfacing with every other RingCentral product. And then there is like a AI sort of engineering team, which sits between the original backend and this AI layer on top of it, but cleans it up so that your data science don't need to be like amazing backend developers, but they should just do enough in terms of we have various different standards. We have over time built a lot of tooling in place, which makes it very easy for you to build a model, to ship a model to production. And then there is a lot of boilerplate sort of pipeline that happens, which is maintained by this AI engineering team, which makes sure that whatever we are pushing to production, there is a lot of like A/B testing, etc., that can be done, and then which will help us figure out if this model needs to be rolled out to production for good, or we want to bring it down. We have multiple versions of same models now. Can we deploy a different one? That sort of thing. So we split it this way, and in the AI org itself, we have a bunch of smaller teams which focus on a certain modality. For instance, we have teams which are focusing specifically on speech to text and on different languages for speech to text. There's like an NLP team. There is a smaller team which focuses exclusively on generative AI aspects of it, which we have curated for the last year or so, who have built a lot of the summarization models that we have, and a lot of this question answering that we do inside the application. So we split it across this bunch of different things, but where we have spent a lot of time was on this tool, like how do you improve productivity of people without really everybody knowing everything about the stack. So that's how we have done it. And we've, of course, there's still a lot of things to do before it becomes an ideal scenario for us, but we have been in through a journey where we've upskilled a bunch of like existing teams inside RingCentral so that they can build out AI powered products. And then from my original startup, we basically brought in everyone, and then we sort of grew that team itself, which builds core AI capabilities.
That's awesome. Also, you spoke about interdependencies and how, sometimes teams think, well, I'll just simply use this OpenAI, API to access it versus, should we be building our own inside? And I observed that like as the number of dependent or interdependencies increase, it always ends up becoming a huge challenge for the company, because then you have all these different sort of bottlenecks, and things like that. So how do you decide when to depend on another open API, if you will, versus building yours in-house?
Right. And so I think the answer differs for every organization, to be honest. For us at RingCentral, especially for the AI org, we have created a framework where we decide, whether we are building something in-house or does it make sense to just take it from outside. And a lot of things go into consideration. One is what is the expected traffic, right, for this particular thing? What is the unit economics for this thing? And the third-party provider that we are using, is it stable enough? Does it provide 5 nines of availability? Does it have all SOC 2 Type 2 sort of compliances inbuilt, right? So these basic questions usually filter out most vendors out of the box. You're left with now a much smaller set, which then helps you understand. For me, the decision making happens on a few parameters. One is like the unit economics of it. The second is user experience, because we are sending a request outside of our network to something else and then waiting for it to come back. What is the user experience now? Is it significantly degraded, or is it like an asynchronous processing where the user doesn't even really know about it? So it's okay, it might not matter. So that is factored in as one of the important aspects. Is what is the experience that we are trying to build? Because at the end, we're trying to build a product. We're not trying to build AI as a service. We're just giving out a product, and that is the ideal sort of benchmark for us. Is what does the end user want, and how do we solve it? Is entirely in question of which technology to use, how to use. A user does not care about that. They don't care whether you use Cassandra or whether you use Postgres, right? They don't care what models you use. So in using these few sort of, we have such decision-making tree, so to say, to figure out whether we use external vendor versus internal. But a lot of times, what we typically do is now that with generative AI, a lot of experimentation has become really easy, so to speak. Now, if you want to see whether something will work, or then you can sort of play around with OpenAI APIs, can sort of see, hey, this is a scale, this is the problem that we are looking at, and these are, let's say, the tags that we want to extract from this data. Is it possible using any of the OpenAI API? If it's possible, that gives you an idea, that gives you a guideline that this can be doable. Now, whether you do it in-house, whether you do it using any existing third-party vendor, that becomes a cost of few different things. And maintenance is actually one of the biggest criteria, because at the end we need to maintain this. So historically, RingCentral also used a lot of third-party AI APIs for a lot of different things. So since then, we have started consolidating a lot of things, because every new API adds a lot of dependency on infrastructure, adds a lot of dependency on the team maintaining it, because there needs to be some guy who has worked on this, and he cannot be moved out, or or she still needs to manage this particular dependency, right? If something goes down, they are the one who effectively become on call for that particular service, which is not a good scenario for anyone involved. So yeah, but we do use a lot of such partners for various. So we use a lot of model monitoring partners, which we use to analyze, how our models are performing in production. So there is a lot of, like, the build versus buy is a bigger problem, right? Whether you build it, whether you buy it, and so depending on the organization, there are some different things that you could consider. And based on, I think one of the key difference here is time to market, right? If it is something that you really need and you cannot go into production without it, or you cannot release a product without it, then maybe you might want to use something that exists already, and then figure out a way how you can build it internally. So could do a bunch of those things.
I see. Thank you. That makes sense. Just one thing I don't think we really touched on too much is, I know with the new RingSense that you guys introduced, you guys have these AI APIs that you're offering. Can you just expand on what those are and how those would help your customers?
Right. So the AI, what we're basically doing is we do a lot of AI inside of RingCentral now. What we're effectively doing is any third-party developer who, let's say, wants to have a video conferencing play in their own application. For instance, you are creating a doctor-patient recommendation, matching something where you could call a doctor and say, hey, have the whole, consultation on video for conferencing call. They can potentially build all of the infrastructure using our AI APIs. So you get speech to text, you get speaker diarization, you get emotion detection, you get a bunch of these things right out of the box, and you just need to switch on a SDKs, and any video conference that you're doing becomes now AI enabled. So, and then you can do whatever you want with this data, right? So we have decided that this is how our product uses these AI artifacts, but not necessarily that is the only way. You could have different UI layouts, you could have different way of showing at it, you could have different ways of indexing this data, and then sort of giving out different insights. So this gives an end user a flexibility to basically recreate their own Ring Central, so to speak. They can create their own experience, which is without actually using the Ring Central product, but using the entire backend, entire RingCentral platform as a service. So it gives you all of this AI by default. So we have specific APIs, like you can just send us a conversation and we can sort of summarize that conversation for you, or you could just give us the entire stream and we can give you everything about all the AI that we can do for this particular stream, all the insights, everything that needs to be done. We can sort of extract that out using just a single API. So it's kind of like an extension of what we did at DeepAffects. So at DeepAffects, we're basically selling these APIs as a service to developers. We've just sort of made them bigger and better, and are using them with the RingCentral platform. So now the video conferencing platform itself is giving all of this out of the box.
I see. Very interesting. Thanks. So we're short on time here. So any final thoughts or last words that you want to try to get into our audience before we wrap up?
No, I think we are in a crazy age. So, go wild, build some crazy AI stuff. We're super excited to see it out there. Nice talking to you guys.
Same. It was really, really great conversation here. Really appreciate you coming out here to have a conversation with us, and really insightful, conversations we had here. Took some notes, and really excited about having you back sometime.
Sure.
Sounds we really appreciate it. Thank you.
All right. Thanks, guys.
This has been the AI Innovation Space, sponsored by Illumin. Thanks so much for listening.
Be sure to connect with us through LinkedIn and the Illumin website to learn more about how AI and emerging technology can help you. Also, be on the lookout for our next episode coming soon. Thank you so much for joining us. Have a wonderful day.